Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Tonight's subject is the value of art in society. Tonight's guests include Mr. Lon Fluman. Mr. Fluman is the instructor at art at Wesley College and is an accomplished amateur artist. Mr. Edward Grant. Mr. Grant is presently the manager of the Advertising Services Department at the Hercules Company in Wilmington, Delaware, and some of his art is exhibited at Wesley College. Mr. Domenico Mortelitto. Mr. Mortelitto works with the Advertising Department at the Dupont Company. He was responsible for the design of the Dupont Pavilion at the recent New York World's Fair and worked in the 1939 World's Fair. His work in sculpturing is unique in that he uses a plastic-type material called art foam. Mr. Edward Loper. Mr. Loper, as an artist, has some national notoriety, and his paintings have been exhibited in the Philadelphia Museums, the Pennsylvania and Baltimore Museums, and at Howard and Atlanta University. Our final guest is a student at Wesley and is considered by many of the students and faculty to be a very fine artist. His works have been exhibited here at Wesley College on several occasions, and as a result, some of his works have been sold to students as well as some faculty members. Mr. George Harrison. Let me start off, gentlemen, by asking you, where do you think art, with the general populace's view of it and their capacity for appreciating it, stands today as an artistic medium? What direction is art going? Is it on its way out? Mr. Grant.
Well, art is never on its way out. Art is a matter of living. It's a way of doing things. Don't you think, Mark? I can't see art being on its way out unless man is going to be on his way out. I mean, we're very prejudiced, as I told you before, about this business of art in society because we're all artists and this is our way of living and our whole life. So we don't think it's going out.
What direction do you think it's going? Is it like some of the articles you read on pop art, for instance? They seem to be stressing nostalgia and painting Campbell's soup cans. Is it reversing itself in any way, do you think?
Oh, I think that pop art and all of these things that have been going on in the last few years is something temporary. They're only little boilings up in a short space of time. I mean, art, as we like to think of it, is something that is so tied up with man that it goes on as long as man does. There'll always be little things like pop art and all other sorts of things happening. Mort, you back me up on this?
To the degree I think that art has never been inseparable from living, and art has always been a very definite part of social behavior and social status. We have a great many periods in the total history of art, and in this sense what I think you must first recognize is that art is, in a funny way, a measure of the status and the level of the society. I think that archaeological research proves this. We know more about what happened to civilizations many years ago through their art than we do through practically any other cultural medium. I think art also, because it is a form of creative expression and basically a device for communicating visually, is bound to reflect the thinking of the times, but also becomes a device in itself as a communicative medium, and therefore is bound to reflect the transitional and experimental stages that civilization goes through. I think that pop art very definitely reflects the mood and the thinking of the times. I think that op art does the same thing, but no differently than surrealism or in its first attempts to interpret the world of its time, nor, for that matter, any of the other isms through the great many series of changes. Now, we can talk about this a little bit because since art is inseparable from its time, it's bound to reflect the thinking of the time. Where it is going, I think as Mr. Grant just said, will be where is civilization going? And sooner or later, I think you will discover that art reflects the capacity and the intellectual and cultural status of the people who get there eventually. Whether you want to interpret this in terms of scientific, automative devices which are going to measure the depth of the civilization, I think whatever it is, it'll come out exactly reflecting that cultural level.
Mr. Loper, as an artist who paints in the abstract, do you tend to find that people will shy away from paintings that are composed, let's say, of abstract symbols or just colors and lines because they don't understand it, or because the painting involves too much of the artist's own feeling? Let's say, what are some of the reactions that you find when people are confronted with paintings of this type?
Well, people tend to like what they understand. And in modern painting, there is so much going on that people don't understand that they tend to want to revert back to something that has been accepted for many, many years. In fact, they like artists who repeat 300 or 400 years ago. This is the type of painter they like, the general public. And then, of course, newspapers and books also write in such a way that they also would rather keep the status quo. So people just can't appreciate modern painting unless they become active. By that I mean, in order for you to appreciate or like anything, you have to become involved with, you have to become a part of that situation. Unless you have been involved in something completely, and by that I mean actually doing something of it actively. Now, in painting, you could also say people could be active in their appreciation by becoming involved with paintings and trying to see what paintings are about. And most people don't want to take the time because it demands too much of them. They want to be given art on a platter and then told by some group that this is art. And usually this has nothing to do with art. We accept and call art whatever somebody does look like a picture, we'll call it art. And yet art is an expression of a human being. And generally, most paintings are not expressions of human beings. They're simply repeats of some form that has been done over again, simply repeated again by another human being, saying exactly the same thing without any new way of looking at the world. And I think that art is a matter of learning to look at the world we live in, but each time seeing it in a new way that has never quite been seen that way before.
What exactly do you think is an abstract painter?
Well, what happens is painting from the very beginning, which is our kind of painting. Our kind of painting started with the Byzantine painters around 400 A.D. The Byzantine painting went through the stages of, say, for 500 years. And then after that, other ways of working started. But each way of painting has been because of the way that preceded it. Now, we talk about being very abstract today, and actually, most of the things that we do today are really extensions of things that have happened before. Now, somebody looks at what they consider a modern painting, which really most times isn't so terribly modern, and they'll say, well, that's too modern for me. The reason is because they don't know what the painter is trying to do. The painter may be only trying to work out a whole theme in basic shapes, such as Mondrian in his work is doing exactly what the Dutch painters did with their geometric forms. When you look through one doorway into the next doorway, into the next doorway. And then on the walls they have these geometric patterns. Well, Mondrian, being a Dutch painter, repeated what the early Dutch painters had always done. He, instead of putting the objects in, he simply broke the picture down to the geometric forms.
How about, now you're talking about types of forms that are prevalent to a group. Symbols, I guess you could call. Do the symbols automatically have a meaning to them, or does the artist give them the meaning? In other words, something that's been handed down already has a meaning. He doesn't have to worry about it, and so forth.
Well, what you can do is a painter that's really a creative painter, he takes from the different types of painting. And to discuss it, you have to know something about the history of painting before you can appreciate what a painter is doing. A painter who the public tends to like very, very much is Van Gogh. And the reason they like him is because they read the book, Lust for Life. But most people don't have any idea or concept what Van Gogh is doing. You see, Van Gogh took that swirl that you see in his work, where things are undulating and swirling and writhing. He took this from El Greco. El Greco had this swirl. So he borrowed the swirl, but he doesn't do it the same way that El Greco does it. He makes the swirl do other kinds of things. He took from Impressionism the broken color, little patches of color. He elongated the patches and made them into streaks rather than the patches, such as Monet and Sicily were doing. He took from Japanese painting the design, the way of putting a simple flat figure against another color shape, such as when he does a person's coat. It's a dark area against maybe a light background of yellow. He took this kind of design from the Japanese. But when he takes all of these designs and then he takes and scrambles all up, and when he gets through scrambling, he comes out with a new way of looking at all of these kinds of ways of working. They are no longer a repeat of what happened before.
How about paintings that are less abstract, on the high order abstraction? Paintings that are naturalistic, landscape and so forth. A lot of paintings, when you paint grass, for instance, you find it impossible to paint each streak of grass. Is there a certain amount of technique and abstraction in technique like this, or is this illusion? Is there any distinction between them that you can think of?
Well, this is all a matter of the kind of approach of technique that the painter wants to use. One painter may do a grass area just as a general flat area of color. Another may do it, such as Cézanne, in little patches of color. In fact, Cézanne's paintings, if people look at them in the middle stage of his life, the whole picture is built up like it's made out of little pieces of brick. I mean, the grass is brick. The buildings are like little small bricks of, say, a half-inch long. Hundreds of them, little bricks, just one alongside the other. And he doesn't try to make grass an imitation of grass. He gives the quality of grass by the color and the relationship of all other units to the whole ensemble.
Or like Mr. Rousseau, he might paint each blade in a primitive, instinctive way in which he is portraying each blade. It might even be that.
Yes, he could do that.
How about the advertising business? Those two of you men are in it. You take a look at something, at an advertisement. You may have a drawing there in an advertisement. Do you find the same type of illusion in it? It seems, almost photographic sometimes. How much abstraction is there really in this type of painting?
Can we back up a little bit, because you're talking about abstraction, and we've gotten from abstraction into techniques, and I have a hunch that what you're really searching for here is what the difference might be between abstraction and realism, or what the effect might be if you adopt either of these approaches. And when you say abstract, maybe are we talking about pure abstract, as you might find in the terms of Mondrian, but you might find even more in some of the abstract sculptural forms and some of the abstract paintings where there is no identity of subject matter at all, and therefore no relationship to realism in terms of recognizing the subject or recognizing what the painting is all about in terms of reality. And then, in which case, you are constrained to approach the abstract in terms of what it means based upon color, pattern, motion, it's a general composition, the total expression, but no relationship to reality at all. And if we're talking about this, we are talking about two different things, because an abstract, by intent and by purpose, is done on the basis of abstracting out of a perceptual concept that image, that concept of things that belong together, which never will be by any stretch of the imagination related to reality. Whereas in reality, you will then have the great variety of opportunities, such as was mentioned here about Mr. Van Gogh's approach, Mr. Cézanne's approach, whether it was El Greco or whether it might be some of the very early primitive painters. They all approached reality in an entirely different way. There were no two great painters who ever approached reality the same way, which is what distinguishes them. If Piero della Francesca did it this way, you suddenly discover that a little later on a Raphael or a Michelangelo or did it entirely differently, but each in their own way, even though they all were doing reality. But there is this great distinction between pure abstraction and realism in painting, and I thought I'd better clear this up because we weren't drawing a strong enough line there. Now, back to this question of in advertising art, and I think your question is, does abstraction play an important part there, or does realism play an important part there? Well, if you work for a company who's concerned with the illustration of its product in an ad, and where it wants the customer to know exactly what that product looks like, I'm afraid you're confronted with a problem of reality simply by the assignment itself. If, on the other hand, you are interpreting in an ad or any graphic impression, any graphic piece of communications for advertising, an impression of the corporate image or the mood within which that product is sold, then you can abstract, you can do decorative, postery type of art, and it's perfectly legitimate. But I think the distinction comes by virtue of what the assignment is. This is where the difference is. Now, in one case you have to interpret realistically, and in another case you don't. Now, this brings up a very nice question, because, you know, Mr. Dali hates Mr. Picasso, and he hates Mondrian, and vice versa. Mr. Dali paints something very realistically and then distorts it on an illustrative basis, just as you would in an ad if you were trying to show this product doing something which you normally couldn't see with the eye, but the illustration permits you to see something that is portrayed on this basis. Whereas maybe if you were doing an ad for a container corporation where they're selling a statement or a philosophy, the sky's the limit, you can be as abstract as you want. I think this is the difference. It's a question of assignment.
If you wanted to create a mood in an advertisement, let's say someone came up to you and said, create a headache, you know, something in the realm of op art, you know, where you see these spirals come down, and of course you look at them, and it sort of gives you a headache, the optical illusion that it does give you a headache. Can this be applied in advertising? Can you get a specific symbol that's surefire to everyone?
This is not just a question of a symbol. Yes, you can create a headache in advertising. And when you refer to op art, what you're really saying is, if you know what op art is based upon the optical function or the irritation of the retina in the eye. This is a basic form of irritation. This is used precisely to do what we just said, to give you a headache. Now, what is significant about its application to advertising is that it can be good or it can be bad, depending upon what the specific intent of that ad is. And when that ad is conceived, when it is visualized, it is visualized, hopefully, if it's successful and if it's worth the money that they spend to create that ad, is visualized to stimulate and excite a reaction on the part of the observer. Now, if the intent of that ad is to give somebody a headache, op art or optic art is a good device for doing so. But this is not determined by op art itself, it's determined by the intent of that ad. Op art has its place in a great many situations, and this is in the area of visual impressions. Sometimes op art can, because of the nature of the patterns that are used, give you the illusion of motion. And if in your ad you were trying to convey a feeling of motion, op art might help you to get that feeling of motion, because it would use those optical art forms that suggest spiraling or suggest movement. Here, op art might be doing a very fine job. If, on the other hand, you just use op art as a device because it's new and different, and just because it's something which creates conversational discussion, but which does not accomplish the original objective of the piece of communication that ad was designed for, that op art is very, not only badly misused, it's somebody else's headache, and they shouldn't give it to the public. I think it's this kind of thing. I don't know whether that answers your question, but
you brought up something about Dali. Now, Dali has been, while he's been in New York, he's been sort of bringing the praises of op art's successor, this pompier art. Now, this goes a little further. This is the same type of illusion, but as he said, under mescaline. Can such a thing really happen? Can he do this, do you think?
Mr. Dali is very interested in a sort of intellectual or philosophical approach in his art, and this is why he is does so well the surrealistic, the Dadaistic type of thing. It's because there is a sort of psychological approach to the interpretation of his subject. This new concept of doing exploded forms, which I think he very seriously thinks symbolize and represent the atomic age, are done specifically for that reason, and you can call them what you want. There will be a new name for it next week, and there will be a great many other names. Mr. Dolly keeps changing the names, and so does everybody else, which is part of this thing that I mentioned earlier, where I think that art always reflects its times and thinking. There's nothing wrong with this, except that it must not be interpreted as meaning the total picture of art. I'm sure that Mr. Loper, in creating a painting, would not be happy at all doing little circles with interpretations of part of a subject mechanically devised to suggest atomic space, such as Mr. Dolly has done, in which case he sort of actually expanded the dot system for four-color screen process, but doing it on a massive scale. It would not be right for Mr. Loper to do that. Mr. Loper isn't maybe as concerned about the surrealistic interpretation of the atomic age. Maybe he's looking at other things. So when Mr. Dolly does this and does give it a new name, he has a perfect right to do so. It'll only be as good as time will prove it out to be as a total piece of the total story of art in history. That's right. And we are not in a position to measure this. Time will measure this, I think, better than anything else. I always remember a wonderful statement that was used in a plaque somewhere that time heals all wounds and wounds all heals. And I think that this is what will happen in a very strong way in the art world, that it will, the bad art, or the art which did not have any real significance, will be killed. It'll be not just wounded, it'll be killed off. If all the art that was ever produced remained as exemplary of the total picture of art, we would have a tremendous amount of art in the world today. But fortunately, a lot of it has died along the way. The stuff that was pretty bad just died, and the stuff that was good survived. And I think the measurement will be based upon survival.
One more thing about Dolly before we go on. A lot of people, when they're confronted with his art, they seem to me to be rationalizing. You know, they say, well, he's really a technician. Do you think they're rationalizing it here because they don't understand it at all?
I think Mr. Loper covered that a little while ago when he touched upon the subject of involvement and understanding. In Mr. Dolly's paintings, because he deals specifically with realism and the realistic portrayal, even if it's a distorted or drooping microphone or a flying egg or something like that, it really doesn't matter. He still does it in a realistic sense, and therefore his ability to interpret that realistically is associated with what most people recognize by involvement as technical capacity to interpret the subject before him. And this is why this is not just a consolation, there's an involvement there. They do not, incidentally, when they say, yes, he's technically capable, by his interpretation of an extended bone with a muscle on the end of it with two teardrops going into a conch shell which rises into the sky, because they begin to worry about this a little bit. At that point, this is dealing with what they think, and there is no involvement there, unless they too have this kind of brain involvement.
What Dolly does is, Dolly takes a natural, realistic situation and puts it into a foreign situation. He takes a natural telephone, draws it, as academically as any of the other thousands of academic realistic painters. He puts it in the desert without any wires and with an ear on it. So all he does is take things that don't belong together and put them into a situation that involves one and takes them out of their normal situation. This is all he actually does. He doesn't do anything new in the sense that he is doing anything creative. His creativity is a matter of objects. It's not a matter of doing painting in a way that it hasn't been done before. Because everything he does has been done before, but not in the same kind of a arrangement of the objects. And this heightens their power. It makes them more powerful for people who are looking for objects. But when you look at his work, if you analyze it, it'll come out to be very much like many kinds of Dutch painting when they were painting the flower pictures, and when they were first painting little still life paintings.
Or even more from the Italian Renaissance, where you can lift these things almost out of those Renaissance.
Take them out of their context and put them into a new context, that's all.
Mr. Loper...
There's nothing creative about it. It's just a new situation. It's not anything creative in the art sense.
In other words, he's pretty much technique in his use of symbols, not only in his technique of applying paint.
Yeah, in order for painting to be truly creative, you have to first find out what painting is basically about. Painting is basically about expressing the qualities in things. And when you use the word quality, I use it so darn much I hate to use the same things over and over. And when you use the word quality, I use it so darn much I hate to use the same things over and over. But when you talk about the qualities in things, a quality would be such thing as delicacy, or richness, or power, or drama, or luminosity, or light, fluffy in quality. These would be the kind of qualities that painting is based on. Rembrandt is not painting a picture of an old man in a room with light shining. He's really not painting that. Rembrandt is painting deep, rich, glowing, powerful, luminous, sparkle, you see. And any human being anywhere on earth, not knowing the situation whatsoever, having never seen this particular kind of man, say someone in China who has never seen this kind of man, he can look at the picture and he can still enjoy the quality of rich, deep, glowing, sparkling luminosity or delicacy or whatever quality the painter is working for. But if you don't know the subject in Dali, you still get nothing. If you have never seen a telephone, and if you have never seen these other objects that Dali uses, you've been raised in a society that has never seen these things, you would get nothing from the Dali except confusion of shapes, but they wouldn't mean anything to you.
Yeah.
Can we back up there a little bit? I don't disagree with what you're saying about Mr. Dali, except that Mr. Dali, actually, when he is not doing the surrealistic subject, and when he paints a simple portrait of his wife, or he paints one shaft of wheat, or he paints a loaf of bread in a basket, has painted it with at least the excitement of a Vermeer,
But without the luminous, rich, glowing, sparkling luminosity of Vermeer or the ambience of light.
Well,
never.
This it would be a little hard to judge, but in some of those still lifes, those unaffected studies, he is an extremely competent painter, and a great many people think that he has caught this luminosity. But this is a
Well,
question
this is a matter of how
opinion
you're
and
looking
how
at
you're
it.
looking at it. That's right.
Because I can't see it.
Well, all right. This
And
is
many
fine.
people who study
Yeah.
this for this quality can't see it in Dali. That's why he's thought of as a skilled technician who paints pictures that excite people who are looking for objects.
Well, this is true, but he also, for instance, will claim, and so do some other people, that when he paints a beautiful beach with the translucency of water and the sparkling glitter of pebbles and things, that he is capturing this. And he has captured it, but not in the same way, for instance, that we're talking about, where it's done purely in terms of the relationship of paint to paint.
Well, if we want to go into make it more complicated,
I was afraid of
is
this.
it all right to get very complicated with this?
Well, what I was going to do is try to get a contemporary painter with Dali in here and sort of compare the two. I was thinking particularly of Picasso. A lot of people consider Picasso to be a surrealist. How about you, Mr. Fleming? You have a little reaction over there.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, of course this is something that can be argued. Picasso, as far as I'm concerned, is probably, I'll use the word probably, the greatest painter since Michelangelo.
Not according to Dali, though.
Not according to Dali and not according to a lot of people, but he has a great deal of imagination. He is constantly working. There are people who, for example, will work a short time and they will get a little bit of success and they will stop, or they will get a certain style and they will continue with it throughout their life, such as Braque did. He never changed from the Cubist movement. Picasso goes along, and for example, his pink period perhaps lasted 2 years, his blue period a few years. His Cubist movement didn't last really too long, and yet he still uses some of these things, but he is constantly changing. And when he runs out of things to do, he simply looks back to some of the old masters or some of his own contemporaries and adapts them to what he wants to do with them. Of course, all artists do this.
You were talking before, Mr. Mortelitto, about Dali and how he is sort of photogenic, like Vermeer, I think. Can Dali do the same thing as Picasso does, let's say, with primary colors, do you think?
No, you're talking about two complete opposite minds, two complete opposite approaches to art, two complete opposite approaches to the technique of drawing, painting, whatever it is. And this could not happen either way, vice versa. Not only that, they would both throw up their hands in disgust if anybody suggested it to them.
Well, wouldn't it be similar to, for example, when Michelangelo and Da Vinci were having the little painters duel between the two of them? They were two opposite people.
I think
They were
closer.
Yes, but I mean in temperament.
in temperament, yes. And also maybe the other thing that makes you think a little bit, as I said before, time and survival is the best measurement of all these things. Today,
sure.
Michelangelo and Da Vinci are still being evaluated to a great degree because there are still a great many people who think that Michelangelo's paintings are very bad and poor and overpowering and all this kind of thing, and some who think his sculpture is saccharine and overdone. I'm sure that if you asked of Mr. Brancusi at some point to emulate or try to understand and work the way Michelangelo did, it would be a shocking, ununderstandable thing to him. Michelangelo was a pretty saccharine, overrated guy in Mr. Brancusi's language. So time will tell this. I don't mean that we can't distinguish between what we like in Mr. Brancusi and what we like in Mr. Michelangelo or Mr. anybody else who is doing a job, but they are very, very different, and I think that it's a little bit difficult to give a summary answer on the total effects of a painter. El Greco wasn't discovered for a long time, and then all of a sudden, wham! Mr. Goya was not particularly accepted for the way he should have been until, and then when the recognition came, it became a great thing. So time, in these cases, proved these men to be great painters.
Well, we're in the same process right now with our op art, our pop art.
Exactly.
And I think that someday someone will come along who will be able to take the good parts from each one of these and perhaps come up with a new
It's
way
very
of art,
possible. Very possible.
You think
which will have meaning.
this is right? Do you think? I was thinking of the pop art. A lot of the pop art gives you the four-dimensional illusion. You know, something that you're looking into something. Do you think, as Mr. Flumen suggests there or implies, that perhaps one day they'll be able to make real things such as people and bowls of fruit, that sort of thing, four-dimensional? Give it a four-dimensional illusion on a thing, something that actually pops out at you. I know you can do this with shadows, but do you think anything like this is possible?
They're doing some of that now in dimension.
Mhm.
They are creating works in dimension where it's a little bit difficult. This comes under a little different heading, but it's an experimental art, and it's only just beginning. And this came out of the, strangely enough, not out of an art class or a studio, but it came out of the Boston Eye Institute, Princeton University, and a few others, where they are dealing with the subject of perceptual vision and empirical vision and the interpretation of these things.
These things tend to be gimmicks.
That's right.
First of all, a canvas is a surface on which you arrange colors. Whether it projects and comes out from the surface or not in some sort of an illusion has nothing to do with whether it's a piece of art. Art is a matter of painting the qualities that we find in things. And the painter's job as a human being is to put down what he finds moving and aesthetic in the objective world. Now, what we get from a painter is, by looking at him, how we can open our eyes and see in objects and situations the world in a new way, so that when we walk down in everyday life, when we in everyday life walk or live or walk through our life day after day, then we can see the world in a way we never quite saw it before, which enriches the world for us. It has nothing to do with gimmicks and gadgets. These are toys for people to play with.
Except that, again, here we go. I think it's always good to have these exceptions. Mr. Picasso was not totally satisfied with putting paint on canvas to prove this point. And therefore, Mr. Picasso went into all kinds of dimensional experiments. He went into all kinds of dimensional devices. He painted with light. He did things in water and space.
That was fun.
It was great fun, but it became part of this accumulative thing which, as Mr. Flumen just said, interested him because Mr. Picasso did not limit himself to one form, and hopefully at the end of a lifetime will have accumulated all these things.
Now, he mentioned the word, it was just fun. Well, to me, if I didn't find enjoyment, if some things weren't fun in art, I wouldn't be interested in them. For example, I like to do realistic things, and when I get bored with it, I like to throw paint at the canvas if I feel like it, and then perhaps go back to something realistic or something in between.
I don't believe that Picasso ever set out to make a painting. I think Picasso was experimenting and hunting, and I don't think he ever tried to finish anything. Well, for instance, Dali, I think, sets out to make something. He is making a finished thing, a painting. This is going to be a completed thing when he's finished with it. I don't think Picasso does. I think life is a great, big, beautiful thing to him, and he's going to enjoy it to the... I think he's probably had more fun than any other painter in the world. I think he's terrific, you know, I think a lot of his work has been done with his tongue in his cheek, which is all right. I don't think Ed agrees with me.
No, I don't.
I think the man has had a terrific time. I think he's been a great man, and I think that art can't be any greater than the man himself.
Well, you know, we talk about artists, we're talking back and forth here, and I think one of the things that we miss is that I think that most of us here that are talking about art are educated to art. And I think that one of the shortcomings of artists, and I think this falls into our schools, is that people do not, or teachers do not educate children to art. They use it as a frill, as something to fill in spare time, something that is not really serious. And yet, we that are sitting here, we feel that it is quite serious. It's our way of making a living, and I think that perhaps if the public could be educated, starting with children, so that they would understand, so that when they look at a completely abstracted or non-objective piece of art, that they would be able to understand some of the processes that went into it, how it was made.
You know, there have been great strides in that in the past. Well, since when I went to primary school, we were taught to draw an apple. An apple was set up in front of us, and the one thing we couldn't do was use a ruler. I remember that. If you wanted to draw a straight line, you weren't allowed to use a ruler. This didn't seem to make much sense to me. I mean, it always seemed to me that was the easiest way to do it. But the ruler had to be put aside, and you drew this apple sitting up in front of you. There's nothing wrong with drawing the apple, but it was a very stiff thing, and they all had to look the same. And you were never allowed to exercise any feeling or imagination you had. If you departed from this stiff drawing of this apple, you were wrong. You got a bad mark, and this wasn't the way to do it.
I think it's fine to let children have a period of time for, well, for example, we hand a child some paint and a brush, and we say, now, you express yourself, do anything you want to. But I also think that they should have some technical knowledge along with it. Very often they give the children the materials and let them go.
Mr. Mortelitto and I were talking about this at great length on the way down, talking about our own children and how fearful we were to pour them into any kind of a mold at an early stage. We wanted to encourage them, but we wanted to encourage them to see more than encouraging them to do something in a certain way.
To understand.
To understand and feel and sense and enjoy. And I think this is the important thing for children.
Mr. Fluman brings up a very interesting point here, though, that should be discussed, and that is that this question of appreciation or understanding of art on the part of children, or for that matter on the part of the elders, that a great many times art is not understandable unless there is the intellectual capacity or the cultural development or the training which permits them to appreciate and understand what it's all about. What is a little bit amazing, and you've all seen this happen, is that we are now having art exhibits and art presentations which have become great big gags and which have become kind of a circus, where people have gone to these art openings, and where they've gone there not to see the paintings, not to have anything to do with this thing we're talking about here in terms of understanding or involvement or appreciation, but to have a great big beautiful social fling and to do as exotic and different crazy things as they can without any reference to the importance of the art. Now, what has happened in these cases is that these have been good big publicity gimmicks, but there has also been a claim, which I think distresses us a little bit, that this was serious on the part of the artist because he thought it honestly reflected our minds and our attitude of our times, and this has gone into the books as such. Now, I think here is something to talk about, because like it or not, this is what they're getting paid for, and this is what they're being recognized for, and this is what all the art magazines are talking about and reproducing. This is what all the galleries are buying and spending money on. This is what all of the people who are purchasing art are buying and investing in. So it isn't quite as funny as we'd like to think it is. It's a little more serious.
Gentlemen, you're sort of getting into the area of introducing people to art, teaching it. Teaching the appreciation. I was thinking, why don't we ask the students a viewpoint? Why why should art be taught in schools? As a student, George, why do you think art should be taught in schools? Do you think it should be taught in schools?
I don't think it should be taught in schools, at least to people who don't want to be taught art. I'm certainly a layman here tonight with these distinguished artists, but I have an opinion, and I'd like to try to express it as best I can, as a layman, of course. Teaching art to people who don't feel art, or showing art to people whose very presence in a gallery profanes the true spirit of art, which of course is immutable, time. And time is the test. But I don't think you can make somebody understand something who really doesn't want to understand it. And I haven't chosen art as a career, perhaps neglecting a possible talent, simply because I didn't want to exhibit my art to people who didn't want to see it. I don't want to have to depend upon whim, coquettishness of people, perhaps dull flattery even, for a living, although it's a very admirable living if you can put up with it, if you really truly believe in it. I don't. I don't believe that anything I've ever painted has said anything to anybody.
But yourself.
But myself, and this is enough. This is gratuitous enough for
The
me.
whole thing.
I think, and of course I know this from experience, George says that he doesn't think anyone has seen anything in his art, and yet at the last art exhibit that we had here at the college, 3 people bought paintings from George. Now, if they had no interest, if the two spirits had not met, then he would not have sold these paintings. And people are not about to go out and pay $25 or $30 for a painting because they like somebody. When people start spending money for art objects, it must mean something to them. They must meet the spirit of the artist. It must be similar to their own. The two things have joined, and so they find that this is something that means something to them. So I think that really, of course I know George's work, I think that he does have the ability to touch certain people.
And that they are desirous of living with what you have produced, whether you like it or not. I think this is true. But I also think that you're touching on the question of whether your art does anything to anybody or not. I almost hate to say this, but you have nothing to say about whether your art touches anybody or not. The public and time and the way it fits will determine this. I think that it's very true that what you create, whether you like it or not, will be reacted upon, favorably or otherwise, in terms of what the people think, in terms of what the thinking of the times is, in terms of time itself. So that, unfortunately, the artist has nothing to say, really, about how people are going to react to what they think. This he has to live with. The great privilege that you have, I think that I have as an artist, is that I have the privilege of creating those things which I think fulfill the desires and the needs and the pleasures and for that matter, the hatred and the sadness and the dramatic excitement of something, purely for my personal edification and interpretation of that subject. What it eventually means, I cannot tell you, and I don't think any of us can. I think time will tell this, and I think that the people who buy and use and live with the art that is produced by such as us are the people who will eventually measure.
Perhaps I'm much too idealistic about art. And that must be it. Because I tend to think philosophically about painting because it's very dear to me. It's something that, it's within me certainly, but was not within my talent to express it. Therefore, I have never felt that I've created anything, or that I've seen so much beauty in other people's paintings. I've envied them so much that I'm almost fearful of putting my brush to a canvas for fear of falling short.
I think we all have this.
And don't ever lose this.
That's right.
Don't ever lose it. If you lose this, you have lost the most valuable ingredient. I'm sure that any of us who are sincere approach, and I'm not concerned about the type of art we're doing, because somebody works in oil, some in watercolor, some in tempera, some in plastic, some in stone, some in wood, whatever it is. But whatever it is, if we fail to approach this with a reasonable amount of fear and trepidation, with a reasonable amount of, yes, sincerity and humbleness, with a real deep sense that this is a great challenge, and that it is more than we are able to really totally fulfill, and the day that we lose this, I think we lose this great privilege of being artists.
I think an artist is finished when he reaches that point.
That's
When he
right.
thinks he's reached perfection,
Yes, I think this is true.
then there's nothing left for him.
You know, there's a terrific moment when you walk up to a blank canvas and you have a handful of brushes and a lot of paint, and you think the only thing that keeps me from being the greatest painter in the world is me.
Right.
I mean, here you are, you're right down to cases.
Well, let me say, from sort of an inner self, I feel that almost every time I approach a canvas, that the canvas actually fights me. It's a battle of who's going to win. Is it going to come out the way I want it to, or is something else going to happen to it? I mean, you really have to work at it. You just don't walk up and begin to paint and say, well, now this is going to be great. I've had one or two students who feel that each time they paint a canvas, that I, as a professor, should owe and awe that this is the greatest thing that they've ever done.
Do you find a lot of students painting expressly for you?
This is what I find, and I try to stay out of the students' way as much as I can. I find, and I've told them this, that please don't imitate me. I have enough of me at home. I don't want to walk into the classroom and find 10 or 15 lawn flumen staring me in the face.
Right.
I mean, it's fine for them to go back and look at some of the old masters and get ideas from it and work from this. I don't mind this, but I don't want them to out and out copy and try to imitate me or any other artist. Now, this happens very often. There are people, for example, Mr. Wyatt is a very good painter, an excellent painter, and people begin to imitate Wyatt because this is the thing that is now selling. Now, I wonder here sometimes whether the artist is truly interested in art, or is he more interested in money?
You ought to grow potatoes, they sell, you know.
Well, you always have a group of followers when you have a successful leader in any area, not just the arts, but anywhere else. And this is bound to happen, and particularly, as you say, if they are successful financially in what they're doing. I'd like to add that Mr. Andrew Wyeth has a long, long way to go to make the kind of money that Mr. Picasso and Mr. Dali have made in the painting business. Mr. Picasso became a millionaire a long time ago.
Well, I think his agent is a millionaire, too.
Well, and he's gaining this, so that money alone, see, is not the criteria, but there also were a great many followers of the different steps of Mr. Picasso, as you just explained them. And you're bound to have this. After all, when you add up the great individual creative artists of the world, it is still a small number of people, not a large number.
Well, I think there are only a few that reach this plateau. We all hope to reach it, but most of us never do.
I'd like to go back and pass something on to George. This is a purely personal feeling, and of course, your own interest and activity in art is personal. It's so darn personal that it's hard to put it into words. But the older I get, the more painting to me becomes the important thing. Doing the painting is the important thing. I mean, nothing else becomes important. I mean, it's the doing of the thing. It isn't finishing or completing or making a picture.
Joy.
It's the great pleasure that you get out of painting, out of just doing, or drawing, or working with clay or wood or anything else. It is the great inner pleasure that you get out of it. And it's so very meaningful to you as you get older. At least it has been to me. So you get to the point where you don't really care whether you are saying anything to anyone else, or whether anyone else likes your things, or whether they don't. You do it because of yourself. It's a very selfish, self-centered thing in a lot of ways, and yet it's a very fine thing, we think.
And I'd like to add another little note here, which George has brought up. And actually, we are all very guilty sitting here right now, because we are doing what we shouldn't really be doing if we really believed as creative artists that the most positive, the most intelligent, the best way to express our ideas would be through paint or whatever the medium is, not through words. And in a way, we are verbalizing about what we should be visualizing in our techniques. So in this sense, we are very guilty. I don't know why some other people came here tonight. I'm sure that we all do it for a reason. We thought it might be helpful, or we were glad to do it because we think it might be constructive, or maybe because out of a discussion we will learn something. But basically, what we are doing is not the best thing that we can do, I hope, because this should be left to the verbalizers, not to the visualizers.
But in a way, it's a wonderful thing that somehow you can put into words emotion. And sometimes they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I agree, of course. Painting nowadays, some of the pictures are worth more than 1,000 words, and some not worth but one, and I can't say it tonight. I spent a lot of time in the village bopping around, kind of. Because you never know where you are. If you look in some of the places, you're there, in reality you exist, and yet in the paintings themselves, you don't exist. And I've seen so many artists who get so drunk or so high and create so much junk and are so elated by it. It's disturbing to me, truly. It is. And I almost don't want to fall in this kind of sensationalism, which is so apparent nowadays.
I think George says junk. Now, I have personal feelings about art, but I don't think that we can say that this or that artist's work is junk. If he creates this with sincerity, this is his way of expressing himself, we may not like it, but that doesn't mean that it isn't good art as far as he is concerned, for him.
This is junk in George's interpretation, which is also all right.
Yes.
And I think that there's two sides. Incidentally, George, I have a little statement somewhere on one of my walls that I put up because I, for years, was talking about a picture is worth 1,000 words, and this statement is printed in words and said, oh yes, I will take 1,000 words anytime. Give me the Constitution, the Creed, whatever these little things are, the Boy Scouts oath, and a few other things, and these 1,000 words I will take any time in the place of a picture. And when you hear this, you see this other side about which is most important. But I think this, back to Blumen, that this question of evaluation, it is all right to have opinions, because if we didn't have them about other people's works, we would not be really very sincere about what we do ourselves as being different. But this is not the measurement, unfortunately. If George's measurement was the actual measurement of that work, I pity that poor guy.
Well, his measurement is just as true for him as the man's way of expressing is for himself.
Oh, right, exactly.
Now, there is one type of, and I would go along on this line of thought with George when he said it's a lot of slop, if you want to call it that. All right, for example, there's a young woman, and I can't think of her name, and I suppose that's just as well that I can't, but she gets things like tin cans and bags of paint, and she gets them swinging. And she's got a canvas down here, and she shoots it at a tin can, and it explodes.
I know.
And this flies all over. Well, I think when an artist does not come into personal contact with his work, it's not really painting. Now, for example, the exact opposite of this, of course, is Pollock. But Pollock had studied the drippings, and he knew what would happen. For example, when he flicked his hand a certain way with the canvas, let's say 3 feet away, he knew what approximately would happen with that, how it would hit the canvas and make a mark. Well, this, I think, is all right. He's made a study of this, but these people that just throw things at the canvas, like Dolly with Victor Borga.
That was when Pollock was working in the 3-foot stage.
Yes.
He got into the 6-foot stage later, the 9-foot period.
But, for example, Victor Borga plays something on the piano, and Salvador Dali takes things from around the kitchen, like gravy and a few other things. Now, maybe he's doing this as a comedy act or part of an entertainment, but I sometimes wonder if this does anything to help our art or what we believe in.
Well, I think we said right in the early stages here that whatever the art is, it reflects the times. This young lady who shoots bullets into her canvases, and incidentally, this was interpreted and portrayed. She was on TV and showed how she did it and what she was producing, and a number of the art magazines have reproduced her work, and she was reviewed by Time and a number of other people, and they have considered it important enough in the contemporary picture to call her one of the important steps of the changing, transient picture of art today. So that just simply the fact that she herself personally with her own hands did not create that work is not enough of an answer. There's something else that's happening, and you must respect this to some degree, and that is that maybe the great painter of tomorrow may not use a brush. Maybe he'll find another instrument. The brush is not has not always been with us. Palette knives have not always been with us. All the things that we know of today in the arts, like a fresco painting, was a brand new thing when somebody discovered what you can do with lime and sand and pigments. And an oil painting, when it was first put together, was something very new and radical when they discovered you could put pigments with oils and things that would go on a piece of canvas. This was pretty radical. And when somebody said, here you can mix these pigments with wax, and they created encaustic painting, or whatever the device was, or somebody found little chips and created these great Ravenna mosaics. These were new, radical things in their time. So you must not ever close the door mentally to the fact that maybe out of these experiments will come for the first time again something as radical as a new idea of a fresco painting or encaustic painting, a watercolor and oil painting, mosaic, name it. And I think in this sense we must not close the door so much as we must look at it. We can evaluate it, but not close the door.
Keep the door open a little bit.
Well,
Yes.
evaluated from the standpoint of the human being and his reaction and what he's saying. He can say it with anything.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, I'd like to think I was intelligent enough to know the answer, but I'm not. This kind of thing. This is a real tough area when you get into the area of measuring or evaluating. I think what we can do is go pretty safely, as we were doing originally here, talking about painting per se, and the differences between schools, and the fact that art itself is a vehicle of communicating visually what is being done in one generation and another. I think these are safe areas. I think the other, where we're evaluating, gets a little bit tough for me.
This thing about evaluating brings me to a funny thing that happened a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, they were selling these so-called abstract paintings, and by a certain artist, and they were pretty well appraised. Well, they found out later is a little silly, but they found out the paintings were done by chimpanzees. This also reminds me of something else where this one psychologist who was working in finger paints in children as a psychological tool. His class got a finger painting by a chimpanzee, and he went on and analyzed the chimpanzee. Is this type of art possible? Can art come by accident, or can lower primates do this sort of thing, do you think?
Well, there's an example of it right now. One of the big museums, or not museums, big zoos bought 2 gorillas. Yeah. And the gorillas did paintings. One sold for $1,000, and the other, whoever bought it probably felt so foolish that they would not disclose the amount or the person that bought it.
You often wonder where the royalties go.
This is not so much a question of whether this is possible, and this is a little bit absurd. But what is interesting about this is the fact that the kind of painting, in quotes, that the chimpanzees created was so closely related to some of the experimental painting that's being done that it was a little bit difficult to distinguish between some of the experimental so-called action paintings and the chimpanzees painting, which is also an action painting in a way. And this is why it's confusing, not because it could be art done by a chimpanzee. I don't believe that a chimpanzee can create art, but the fact that there has been an association between action painting and what the chimpanzee proved reflects our times and our willingness to accept such experiments at this level of appreciation. I think this is the thing that's a little bit shocking, surprising, and I wish I understood it.
Well, but the thing is, we've taken the chimpanzee and compared it to non-objective. But the galleries are full of very, very bad art of all periods.
Right.
The museums, and when you say time is going to do something about it, it hasn't done it yet. The Louvre is full of junk.
Yes.
It's loaded with junk.
This is
Pure
right.
junk. Has nothing to do with art. It got there because somebody gave it to the museum, and the museum can't turn it down. If a person has enough money, they've got to take it. They put it in the gallery, it's got to stay. It's full there. When Napoleon decided he wanted the picture, if he liked it, personal preference. He had no idea about what art was. If he liked it, he put it in the Louvre. Galleries everywhere are filled with this kind of stuff. And it is junk. And it's just as bad junk as the chimpanzee's picture doing non-objective. Because the first thing that comes out of it is it an expression by a human being seeing the world in a given kind of way that had never been seen before? Now, if a human being puts down, regardless of his skill, he doesn't have to be skillful. If a human being puts down what he has found in the objective world in a way that's never been done before, that he has worked out of his own conscience, then if he expresses it, his sense of balance, his sense of reaction to line, his sense of reaction to color, then it's valid, whether it looks like what a chimpanzee did or not.
Yeah.
And the same thing by some man who paints a picture that's based on the traditional trends in painting and repeats that which has happened before. It is not art. Because he has not seen the world out of his own eyes. He's repeating the formulas and dogmas of a tradition in a school. The academic painters of the world are the worst possible thing that's ever happened to art. And as soon as a ism comes along and they all get on that bandwagon, the first couple of people who start working out these concepts and ideas are creative because they are working a new thing. But as soon as another group starts to following this form or this formula, they become a school and academic. And all they do is repeat that which other people have found. And when they start doing that, it can be non-objective, it can be realism, it can be any ism. But if it's a repeat of a something that has been done before without any new way of seeing the world, it's phony. And the Louvre and all the other galleries are filled. The Philadelphia Museum is filled. And you can go from picture to picture and show this.
Yes, but isn't it also true that in the Louvre there are some of the great works of art of all time? And if so, don't you think we
Yes.
know the difference between...
No. No.
You don't think we do?
No, I don't think we know.
Well,
that.
then how-
A good example of it.
All right.
In the Louvre, there are two pictures side by side. There's the Mona Lisa, and right alongside it is a painting by Titian, one of the great pictures of all times. The Louvre picture, I haven't seen it. The floor is worn out in front of the Louvre. In front of the Titian, it was good rub. And
Well-
the Titian is art. And Mona Lisa is just an academic picture.
Well, this makes a very difficult discussion because then you have to...
And how do I call it academic? Because in that picture, he only repeated the whole thing verbatim of the kind of painting that was just before him. He didn't add anything brand new in it. The paint is dull.
Well, unfortunately, you'd have a hard
It
time...
doesn't have color.
I think all of the things you might say about it are good in terms of your own interpretation of it, but
Not my
unfortunately...
interpretation.
Well, unfortunately,
No.
the history of art does not agree with you.
Yes, of course, because if you get any artist and you sell him, he'll go.
Oh, no.
And he'll keep going as long as the public will buy it.
The total history of art recognizes those things which are classified as the world's great pieces of art, great masterpieces. Now,
How did they
whether-
miss Giotto?
Beg pardon?
How did the world miss Giotto?
It didn't miss Giotto.
It did miss Giotto. The only reason
Giotto
we...
is recognized as one of the great
Since-
Italian primitive,
since-
just as great as Da Vinci is for his Mona Lisa.
Fine. Since Cezanne. Before Cezanne, they did not recognize Giotto. Giotto became recognized because they saw in Cezanne the same monumental structural qualities, and then they said, gee, there's a man that was painting back a long time ago, and he had the same quality. Then they started becoming interested in Giotto.
But Giotto was,
And up to that time, they thought him as a curiosity.
he was not a curiosity. He was
He
a great
wasn't
Italian
saved.
primitive.
He wasn't saved because of the public loving him.
He was a great Italian primitive in all the histories of art, and I only go back 50 years myself to reading about
You
Giotto.
gotta go back to Cezanne.
Well,
Cezanne was
all
more
right,
than
so
50.
anyhow, the important thing is that Giotto is a great
Now
painter.
we say it.
But he is, and so is the Mona Lisa in the sense.
Sure,
Unfortunately,
if you
I don't think
believe
you
it.
or I can fight the rest of the opinion of all the world's critics and all the world's histories and say
And
Mona
critics
Lisa
are
is very
based
good.
on what?
Well,
If somebody writes an article and everybody starts to believe it, he becomes a critic.
Gentlemen, may I make a comment here? Every discussion that I've ever gotten into on art with my friends or anywhere along the line has always ended up with at the point where I thought one way and they thought the other. It was a matter of opinion, which was a matter of taste and a matter of enjoyment. I like one thing and you like another.
I don't
And,
think it comes to these things.
Well, you like one
I
thing.
think
he's
and I
talking
don't-
about the discussions.
I'm
He's
talking about your discussion. I say
Well,
that my
I think
experience.
it comes down to a matter of knowing what art
No.
is, knowing something
No.
about what art is.
Oh, maybe I didn't know anything about what it is, Ed, but what I said was that in my
I don't know about that.
experience, that
I don't
the
know that.
discussion in this thing has always come down and ended up with a difference in opinion as to taste, as to what you like and what you approve. You don't like the Mona Lisa, I do, or any other thing. I mean, we can differ on what we like.
But aren't there
And,
certain
because-
qualities that anybody can look at and find?
Sure, I can take those qualities and say they're reasons why I like the thing, and you could say they're the reasons why I don't like them. And
Oh,
this
no,
is
they're
what
more
makes art
to it.
valid. This is what makes art
There's
valid,
more
because
to it than that.
well, if I
It's a
felt the
matter
way
of
you
use
did,
of the qualities.
if I felt the way you did about painting, or you felt the way I did, there wouldn't be any point in one of us painting. I mean, one of us ought to quit.
But this is why,
Because we're different.
yeah, but this is why the art books always write so many things that nothing ever means anything. Because it always comes down to where people will say it's personal preference. It's more than personal preference.
Well,
It's much more than that.
yes, it is, but this is what I was just saying, that about time and the great authorities on the subject, not myself, believe me, who will tell you that they think these things, which whether we like them or not, are the great works of art. Sure, there's a lot of junk in the Louvre, and there's and a lot of junk in a great many other places, but there are also some great pieces of art there, and those are as great as the world totally acknowledges them to be. Not just you or I, but the rest of the books, the records, the authoritative statements. Now, we can disagree with these statements, but
It
that,
depends on who's making the statements.
well, who makes this statement about a painting? Who do you consider the authoritative person to make a statement about your art or my art or Mr. Da Vinci?
The
Who
people
is it?
who make a study of it, the people who become completely involved in making a study of what painting is about.
Well, these
And
are
only these people.
Well, they think these things are great, and that's what the museums are banking on, the fact that these authorities have said they're great.
You know, for me, the value of a painting is determined by me and my feeling about it. It's again, this personal thing.
Oh,
I
this
mean-
is, yeah, well,
I mean, when you
we were
get
trying
down
to, we were trying to
yeah.
lift it out of the
Well, you're saying,
personal
well,
thing
who
here.
I'm not
determines it?
interested
It
in the
still
personal
is,
side. I'm interested in,
it still is me when I enjoy a painting, whether I
Sure.
don't enjoy it.
But
I've
you-
got to enjoy it within the painting is good or isn't good. I really don't when you come right down to
Then
it.
what-
You
what's
talked
the-
about Giotto. He wasn't liked before 50 years ago. Now he's wonderful. Another
because
50 years,
they
he may not
find
be,
in
you
him
know, I
now
mean.
qualities that they have recognized in other people that
But
are
another
great
50
qualities.
years, he may not be liked, you see. I mean,
Never know.
Well, you can have
can't
likes
tell.
and dislikes within an artist. For example, some of Van Gogh's first works I prefer. But when you get into his radical type of painting, I don't care for this, but yet he has had an influence. And I think Da Vinci has had an influence. Whether we like him or dislike him, he still influenced us somewhere along the line. And even Giotto, even though, for example, we may say he wasn't recognized at the time, he still influenced those who he came in contact with and those around him.
I'd like
Those
to throw,
who follow.
gentlemen,
Yes.
we're getting close.
Well,
to
it all
our-
becomes a
I
matter of
I want to
evolution.
throw a question back here to Mr. Leach. Your subject was the value of art in society, and we've been talking about painting practically the whole time. I think art is a lot broader than painting. Look,
Yeah.
I'm involved in it too, and Ed is, and Mort is, and Mr. Flume is, and George is, and we all love it. But I think it's a lot broader. I mean, you've got architecture, you've got sculpture, you've got drawing,
Well-
music, you have